During the mid-1980s, the UK Ministry of Defence recognized that a lot of new technologies were becoming available for military aircraft, particularly in the field of sensors. They wanted to do a bit of a midlife update to upgrade their Tornado GR.1 strike jets to something a little bit more modernized. The main goals were to incorporate a fully modern suite of new systems, expand medium-altitude standoff attack capability, and improve the defensive systems for greater survivability. It took quite a while for a comprehensive upgrade package to take shape, and it wasn't until 1994 that the contracts were signed. Work progressed from 96 into the early 2000s to bring the older Tornadoes up to the new standard. The new GR4 upgrade package included a new heads-up display, cockpit connections for night vision goggles, a new forward-looking infrared sensor system along with a completely new combat and targeting computer, GPS navigation equipment along with new avionics, and significantly expanded weapons compatibility, allowing the jet to carry the new Storm Shadow and Brimstone missiles. The outer shell was still a Tornado, but internally it was almost a completely new aircraft, with just about everything inside the jet either rebuilt or replaced. The first GR4s started entering service in 1997 and saw service through the UK's participation in the 2003 Iraq War. This was also the first use of the air-launched Storm Shadow cruise missile, which was controversial at the time due to the high cost of the weapon. GR4s also flew combat operations over Afghanistan, Libya, and Iraq a third time to attack ISIL. The Tornado GR4 was phased out of service starting in 2019, and as an interesting bit of trivia, weapon pylons from retired GR4s have been recycled and fitted onto Ukrainian Su-24s, allowing them to carry the Storm Shadow cruise missile. What we get in War Thunder is the Tornado GR4, a strike aircraft in Rank 8 of the UK tech tree at battle rating 12.3. This jet gets a full ballistics computer with all of the top-tier features, a built-in thermal imaging system with an insane 95x optical zoom and a very high resolution along with an auto-tracker, a radar warning receiver that tracks C through J bands, helmet-mounted targeting, and a missile approach warning system. Notably, with the quantity of countermeasures this jet can take, it's one of the few cases where you probably don't need to turn the MAWS off. Its radar is the ARI 23274. This is a rare example of a tracking-only radar set which is fixed in ACM boresight mode until it finds a target. The radar set on the Tornado family is a consistent source of contention, and there are various bug reports about it, complaining about missing radar features and whatnot, but for now, this is what we get. For loadouts on the GR4, you get a huge selection of freefall and guided air-to-ground munitions, a targeting pod, drop tanks, countermeasure pods, and a pair of sidewinders. The sidewinders you get are the AIM-9L and 9M. These are both 30G all-aspect infrared missiles, with the 9M being smokeless and having infrared countermeasures. As a reminder, the GR4 is a bomber, but these are perfectly credible weapons to defend yourself with, especially with the helmet-mounted targeting. For laser-guided bombs, you get a few different options. The Paveway 4s give you a larger quantity of bombs with inertial tracking and optional satellite mode, but the Paveway 3 offers a much larger warhead in exchange for just carrying one bomb. The Mark 13s are kind of in the middle, but they don't have inertial tracking, which is a bit of a disadvantage. You also get two versions of the PGM, the 500 and 2000. These are inertial-guided, rocket-assisted glide bombs that use infrared homing for their terminal guidance phase. They have incredibly long range, but you're limited by the game's render distance, and they're also incredibly slow weapons. It can take well over a minute for them to impact, depending on how high and how far you launch them from. Your ATGM is the Brimstone, operating in semi-active laser mode. And before you start typing a comment, yes, we all know that they nerfed the Brimstones and removed its other guidance modes. and for now, they just function with regular laser guidance. You can take a fairly high quantity of these, but they're slow, which is a notable limitation with long-range shots. More on that later. In terms of its flight performance, the GR4 is very much like other jets in the Tornado family. It's a huge, heavy jet with a flight envelope that feels really limited compared to a lot of other aircraft at this BR. The acceleration doesn't really open up until you hit 600 kilometers an hour or so, but on the flip side, the top-end speed is really good, and it climbs pretty well. Obviously, this is a variable geometry aircraft with the usual caveats that brings about manual versus automatic control. The agility of the GR4 is, like other Tornadoes, quite simply not good. In preparing this review, it felt a little better in maneuvers than the last time I flew a Tornado, but basically everything you face will be able to outperform it in a one-on-one dogfight, so that's something to keep in mind. You can use manual wing sweep and combat flaps to squeeze a few extra degrees in a turn, but again, it's a really heavy jet and the energy retention isn't great to begin with, so if you start twisting around, you're going to find yourself in a really painful slow crawl very quickly. When you fly this out into air battles, you might not have a great experience. This is a strike jet, so your role is going to be attacking bases and AI ground units to complete mission objectives and, win the match. But some of the regular fighters on your team can load up with bombs and just barely beat you to the strategic targets on most of the maps if they make a full commit suicide rush, which some of them will. Air combat in this plane is a challenge, as it just isn't good in a dogfight, and it only gets a pair of sidewinders, so if you must use this for air combat, your best bet is going to be to try and keep your speed up and avoid turn fights whenever possible. The real home for this plane is doing close air support over a ground battle, and there's both good news and bad news. The GR4's lack of maneuverability can make it difficult to position and reposition for attack runs unless you fly really far out away from the battle. The lack of a search radar is also an issue, as it's a little harder to keep an eye out for enemy combat air patrol, and your options are limited if somebody starts throwing AMRAAMs or R-27s at you. That's the bad news. The good news is that there's lots of good news. Now, before anything else though, a reminder that the usual close air support caveats apply. You're at the mercy of the weather, the Pantsir S1 exists and can shoot you down about 4 seconds after you spawn in without even setting off your radar warning receiver, and other top tier SPAA is no joke either. With that said, the GR4 gives you a lot of options. It's got a really good mix of laser and IR guided weapons, and frankly, even going up with a huge load of dumb bombs can work if you just carpet bomb a cap point or a popular hiding spot. I got more higher scoring games with the brimstones, sometimes as many as like 5 or 6 kills, but I got more reliable kills more often with the PGM IR glide bombs from short and medium ranges, like 4 to 8 kilometers. And they can be a lot safer to use, even up close, since you can turn off and run immediately after firing one of them. Something else to remember is that you can take mixed loadouts, like PGMs and brimstones at the same time, and get the best of both worlds. Also, the GR4 has an absolutely insane supply of countermeasures. This is the only jet I've flown where I basically never turned off the missile approach warning system, and if somebody's throwing radar or infrared missiles at you, especially from the edge of their engagement range, the GR4 ends up being a bit more survivable than a lot of other close air support jets, but not invulnerable, so don't get overconfident. The last important thing to remember is that all of your weapons are horribly slow, so having your target get killed by someone else or duck into cover 2 seconds before impact by pure luck, having your laze switch focus onto a dead tank, and so on, are all going to be fairly common experiences. Visually, the GR4 looks basically like the other short-nosed Tornadoes. None of the paint jobs are especially interesting, but they're not bad, and I didn't notice any obvious errors on the 3D model. Landing this jet will take a little practice if you haven't done Tornado stuff before. It gets thrust reversers, which you can use in flight by the way, which are going to help reduce the landing run, but remember, this is a heavy plane and you don't want to drop your airspeed off too quickly on final approach. You can throw gear out at about 500 kilometers an hour and landing flaps at about 425. The cockpit gives you an MFD in the center of the console, a useful heads-up display, and the radar warning receiver is right where I like it. But the forward view does feel a bit obstructed. Still, I had an easy time flying this with the VR headset. To close out on the Tornado GR.4. This jet gets really strong air-to-ground weapons. It carries a huge quantity of those weapons. It gets an insane amount of countermeasures. And it's reasonably fast. However, it'll never be a good dogfighter. Its air-to-air weapons are very limited, and its radar is also very limited. The final verdict on the Tornado GR.4 is that this jet is a really strong performer for close air support, but if you're mainly an air battles player, you might have a harder time with it. It performs well within its niche as a tactical bomber, but outside of that role, it can tend to struggle. As always, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, check out this other one.